When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, the air is still. Only what must continue, continues. The gate number is still displayed. No flight is listed beneath it. The departure time has cleared. What remains on the panel is only the number. A shape pressed in light against a dark field, held there by a current that does not know the gate is empty, that does not distinguish between the hours when passengers sit beneath it and the hours when no one does. The number requires no audience to remain a number. It is displayed because the system that displays it has not been told to stop. The seats face the window. They face it at the angle they were bolted into, which is the angle that was decided before this terminal existed, before this gate was assigned, before the carpet beneath them was laid. They will face the window when the first passengers of the morning arrive, and they face it now, in the interval between. The interval does not change the angle. The seats do not require occupation to remain seats. Outside the window, the apron is lit. Amber lights mark the taxiway edges at intervals determined by aviation regulation. They have been lit since dusk and will remain lit until the light of the morning makes them redundant. A single aircraft stands at the adjacent gate, connected to a jet bridge, its running lights cycling through their sequence. The aircraft is not going anywhere tonight. The lights cycle regardless. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The floor begins at the threshold of the gate and runs without interruption to the far wall. It is linoleum, linseed oil, limestone dust, wood flour, and pigment, pressed under heat into a continuous sheet. The oil hardens through a process that began during manufacture and continues in the material now, too slowly to observe. The same chemistry ongoing in the floor that no one is crossing, as in the floor that thousands cross each day. The surface does not record what has moved across it. Each footstep is received and passed downward and released. The linoleum was made for this, for the accumulation of contact that a terminal produces over decades without any single contact leaving a mark. The floor underneath the fixed seating is the same floor as the floor in the open corridor. The same oil, the same limestone, the same pigment chosen for the high traffic zone, present also in the shadow beneath the seat, where no one has looked in years. The surface catches the overhead light evenly. There is a zone between reflective and matte where the material sits, not bright enough to return an image, not dull enough to absorb without answer. It has sat in that zone since installation. It will sit there in the morning when the light is different and the shoes arrive. The floor makes no preparation for either. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The fluorescent tubes run the length of the ceiling in rows. Each tube is a sealed glass vessel containing mercury vapor at low pressure. When current passes through the electrodes at each end, electrons move through the gas, colliding with mercury atoms and raising them briefly to a higher energy state. As the atoms return, they release that energy as ultraviolet radiation. light at a frequency the human eye cannot register. The inside surface of the tube is coated with phosphor. The ultraviolet arrives. The phosphor converts it. Visible light falls toward the floor, toward the seats, toward the number that is still displayed on the panel below. The mercury does not know it is illuminating an empty room. The ballast hum is what the room sounds like now. It is a low, continuous sound at a frequency set by the electrical current cycling through the control gear. During the day, when the gate was occupied, the hum was present, but not present. The auditory system learned to subtract it from the room, the way the eye subtracts the flicker that some perceive and most do not. The hum did not stop when the passengers left. It was here before they arrived, and it continued after. What changed was the field against which it was heard. The hum is the same frequency it was at noon, the same frequency it was at 1800, when the last boarding call sounded over it. The ballast does not adjust its output to the population of the space. The circuit holds its frequency. The phosphor converts. The light falls. The sound of the current continues at the pitch the circuit determines, consistent across the hours of use and the hours that follow. The room's own frequency, audible now because the other sounds have cleared. The tubes are warm, not hot. The operating temperature of the arc is elevated above the room, but not significantly. The glass radiates a small portion of this warmth downward. By day, the warmth is absorbed into the larger thermal mass of the occupied space. At this hour, the tubes are among the warmest surfaces in the ceiling. A narrow band of heat above empty chairs, giving what they give to air that is not cold enough to make the difference felt. The light reaches the floor in 18 nanoseconds. This is not a duration that carries texture. It is an interval too brief to have a middle. The light is at the tube and then it is at the floor, and the space between those moments is not experienced as travel. The floor receives it, returns a portion upward. The room is in this exchange continuously, the light moving between the surfaces that face each other, arriving and departing, the ballast hum underneath all of it, the frequency of the current made audible, holding at its note. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The system that conditions the space moves air continuously, drawing it from the room, passing it through filtration media that capture particulate above a certain size, adjusting its temperature and humidity, returning it. The cycle completes many times each hour. The air filling the space at any moment is recently processed air, mixed with whatever has entered through the building's pressurized envelope since the last cycle. The filtration media holds what it removes. Each pass through the filter deposits another layer. Particulate from shoes, from skin, from the fabrics passengers carry through the gate, from the outside air that enters when jet bridges seal and terminal doors open and close. The filter has been accumulating the day. It holds everything it caught in the order it arrived, which corresponds to nothing except sequence. The morning's first passengers and the last departure in the same media, at different depths, without distinction or hierarchy. The humidity is regulated. The system measures the moisture content of the air and adjusts. In a terminal without passengers, the moisture load is lower. No respiration, no wet clothing, no heat rising from gathered bodies. the system responds. The humidity it maintains at this hour requires less intervention than the humidity it maintained at peak hour, when several hundred people occupied this concourse and their breathing was the primary source of moisture in the space. The system does not register this as absence. It registers a lower moisture load. It adjusts its output. The air reaches the humidity the system has determined appropriate, and the system holds that value within a range, adding when the air falls below the lower threshold and withholding when it approaches the upper. The missing passengers are a variable in a calculation. The calculation continues. The building is held at a slight positive pressure relative to the night outside. This means the air inside pushes outward through every gap, through the seal at the door frame, through the junction between the jet bridge collar and the gate threshold, through any imperfection in the building envelope. Contaminants from outside do not infiltrate. The building breathes outward. The air conditioning this space was outside, once, drawn through the intake at a location the architects chose for its distance from the exhaust and from the vehicle lanes. The system received it, filtered it, conditioned it, and returned it as the air that now fills the empty seats and the empty corridor and the space around the gate number still held in light. The air does not know it is filling an empty room. It fills this space because it has been conditioned and pressurized, and because the space exists to receive it. The people it was designed to be breathed by are elsewhere. The system does not adjust its purpose for their absence. The processing continues. The air cycles. The exchange between the intake and the room and the return requires no presence to proceed. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The door seals are compressed. On one side of the door, the conditioned air of the terminal, processed and pressurized, held at the temperature and humidity the system maintains. On the other, the air of the jet bridge, cooler or warmer depending on the hour, moving with whatever currents the differential between the bridge and the aircraft produces. Between them, at the perimeter of the door, a continuous gasket runs the full frame. The gasket holds the boundary. It holds it across every millimeter of its length, without variation, without pause. The gasket does not pass this difference through. The door is closed. The material is compressed, pressed into the frame along its entire length, held in that deformation by the closure. A gasket pressed this way resists. It pushes back against the force that deforms it, and the pushing back is what seals the gap. The boundary is not latched or locked. It is held by the state of a material under continuous pressure, which is the state the closed door produces and which persists for as long as the door remains closed. The door was last opened by a member of ground crew finishing a final check. That person is elsewhere now. The door they closed is still closed. The compression they produced in closing it is still present in the material. The same deformation, maintained by the same force, the boundary still held, the differential on either side still separated by the millimeters of compressed gasket the closure left. When the door opens, the gasket will return to its original geometry. The material has that tendency to recover the shape it holds when no force is applied. The compression will release, The gasket will expand into the gap the open door leaves. Then the door will close again, the compression will return, and the boundary will resume. The gasket does not accumulate a record of these cycles. Each time the door opens, the material returns. Each time the door closes, the boundary is held again, from the beginning, by the same property of the same material. Consider what is held at this threshold. The air in the terminal passed through the filter. The air in the jet bridge did not. The gasket between them is a few millimeters of material holding the difference, not deciding to hold it, not attending to it, simply compressed by a closed door into the geometry that sealing requires, and holding in that geometry for as long as the door remains what it is. The boundary is held without attention, without decision. The door is closed because no one has opened it, and no one has opened it because there is no flight and no reason. And in the absence of reason, the boundary persists as it was left, the differential on either side unchanged, the threshold between the two spaces maintained by the state of the material alone. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Return to the number on the panel. It is a shape formed by points of controlled luminescence in a matrix, elements arranged to render the combinations the system requires. The system drives them according to its current instruction. The instruction is to display this gate number. No flight is attached to the instruction. The instruction to display the number exists without reference to any flight it once indexed, and the panel holds the number regardless. The number refers to a location. This gate, this threshold, this point in the building's geometry. This is what the number has always referred to. It did not change when the last flight closed its doors. It did not change when the jet bridge retracted. It does not change in the hours when nothing is assigned to it. The number is the address of a location, and the location persists, and the number persists in marking it. A small portion of the light that forms the number reaches the window and passes through. It enters the night beyond the terminal. A ground crew member crossing the apron might see it from outside. A number reversed in the glass, present in the building's face, saying something in the language of airports to the empty apron. The number is not addressed to anyone crossing the apron. It is not addressed to anyone. It is displayed because the instruction to display it has not been changed. The number is not waiting. Waiting implies an orientation toward what has not yet arrived. The panel displays because it is instructed to display, and the instruction was set during the day's operational configuration, and it has not been reset. There is no anticipation in the circuit. The number holds its light the way the floor holds its composition, because that is the state the material is in, because nothing has intervened to change it, because the system that produces it has not been told to stop. The linoleum continues beneath the gate panel. The same material, the same linseed oil still lengthening its chains, running under the panel and under the seats and into the service corridor behind the wall. The same sheet, bonded to the same substrate, carrying the same pigment pattern into the parts of the terminal that are not visible from this gate. The floor does not end at the edge of the space. It continues into the rest of the building, connecting this threshold to every other threshold, continuous in the material that no individual footfall marks, and that all of them accumulated gradually alter over years. The ballast hum carries the same frequency 2 concourses over, where a cleaning crew is working, the same tubes, the same phosphor converting the same radiation into the same light, the same sound above whoever is there and above this space where no one is. The frequency is a property of the circuit. The space inherits it without choosing it. As it inherits the pressure the HVAC maintains, and the temperature the system holds, and the humidity the measurement and adjustment cycle produces. The space receives what the building provides. The air that was in this room is cycling through its return. Somewhere in the building's mechanical infrastructure, the air that occupied this space is passing through the filtration media, is having its temperature and humidity adjusted, is being prepared to return. When it returns, it will fill this volume again, move past the sealed door, past the lit panel, past the floor that holds no record of the day's footfalls. The returned air will not know it has been here before. The building does not require passengers to continue doing what it does. The decision to hold the lights, to cycle the air, to maintain the pressure and the temperature. This was made before tonight, held in the configuration of systems that do not consult the occupancy of the space before proceeding. The space is maintained. The maintenance does not distinguish between the occupied hour and the one that follows. Outside, the amber lights at the taxiway edges continue their sequence. They were lit before the last flight departed. They will be lit when the first aircraft of the morning arrives. The space between those two moments is the same apron, the same lights, the same building holding the same gate at the same address, the systems at the same settings, the air in the same cycle, the hum at the same frequency it held at noon. The number is still displayed. The floor continues beneath it. The tubes give what they give to the air below them. The gasket holds the boundary the closed door left. The air that was here is being prepared to return. None of this is waiting. It is the building at this hour, which is the same building it is at every hour. The same materials, the same systems, the same gate held in the conditions the building provides. The interval between passengers no different from any other interval to the floor that does not record footfalls, to the circuit that holds its frequency, to the compressed gasket that does not accumulate a record of the cycles it completes. The night continues. The building continues within it. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. When night falls, the archive remains. When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, the air is still. Only what must continue, continues. The books are still here. Not waiting. They do not wait. They stand in the positions they were shelved into, spines outward, titles facing the aisle. They stood this way before the last reader left. They will stand this way when the first reader arrives. The interval between does not change their position on the shelf. The books do not require readers to remain books. The lights have been off for some time. The emergency strips along the floor baseboards give a low, continuous light, enough to show the aisle between the shelves, the reading tables with their chairs pushed in, the return cart near the entrance still holding 3 volumes that arrived too late to be reshelved before closing. The books on the cart are where they are. Their spines face outward. Their titles are legible if there were someone to read them. The reading room chairs are pushed in at angles that the last readers left them. No one has adjusted them since. Each chair is at the angle that the person who last sat in it produced by standing up, pushed back at whatever distance and rotation the act of standing required. The chairs are not in the positions the room was designed for. They are in the positions that a day of use left them. In the morning, before the library opens, someone will straighten them. Until then, they hold the record of the last occupation, the angles, the distances, the geometry of a room that was full of people and is not. Outside, the stone facade holds the temperature of the day a little longer than the air around it, the mass of the material giving up its heat slowly, the exterior surface cooling toward the night air at a rate the stone's density determines. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The dust on the upper shelves is older than the dust at eye level. No hand reaches there regularly. The surface has been accumulating since the last time someone cleaned it. Longer ago than anyone currently working in this library was employed here. What sits on the top edge of each volume, on the horizontal shelf between books, in the slight gap where a spine does not quite reach the shelf's edge, is the deposit of that interval. Fibers shed from paper, fragments of binding cloth, particles carried on the air when the ventilation runs and when readers pass through the stacks. The dust holds everything in the order it arrived, which is no order at all. A fiber from a volume shelved decades ago and a fiber from one acquired last month are both present, indistinguishable at the scale of the eye. Both simply fiber, both part of the same accumulation. The order that time produces when it is not interrupted by intention is this: everything together, depth as the only record of sequence, earlier below and later above, the layers too thin to count. The dust is also from the people who have been here. Skin cells shed in the act of reading, of reaching past one book to retrieve another, of sitting at the tables for hours with a volume open on the surface. These are in the dust on the upper shelves, carried upward by the air movements that the ventilation produces, settling where the air slows. The dust on the shelves above the reach of hands is partly the record of the bodies that have been in this room. It holds this without organizing it. The reader from 30 years ago and the reader from last Tuesday are both present in the same accumulation, both simply particulate, both part of the deposit that the interval between cleanings produced. The shelves themselves are oak, chosen for this work, for the dimensional stability that holds through decades of humidity cycling, for the behavior that institutions have confirmed over long use. The wood has been here longer than most of the books it holds. It has swelled and contracted with every season since installation, the wood moving by amounts too small to see in any single year. The total present now in the slight variation in fit where adjacent shelf units meet, in the way the brackets seat differently on the left side of this section than on the right. Where a heavy reference volume has rested in the same position for years, the shelf surface beneath it has received that weight differently from the surface on either side, the fibers compressing at a rate that years accumulate. The weight of the book is in the shelf. The shelf does not show it. The shelves hold the books in order. The dust between them holds everything else. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The paper inside those books is not what it was. The change is not visible from the spine, not visible from the outside of any page. It is in the fiber, the cellulose that gives paper its strength, the long structural threads bonded to each other at their contact points, the network that holds the sheet together against the small forces of handling. The threads shorten over time. A sheet whose threads have shortened enough tiers rather than folds, yellows from the outer edges inward, becomes the kind of paper that resists being turned. This is further along in some books than in others. The older volumes, the ones with the particular smell that concentrated time gives to paper, the ones already yellowed at the margins, are further along the same path that the newer volumes are also on, more slowly. Both paths lead in the same direction. The difference is only position, how far each has traveled, how much of the original fiber length remains. The smell is part of this. As the fibers break down, the paper releases what it has been holding. The compounds enter the air of the room at concentrations too low to name individually. They register as a quality, a character, the atmosphere of a space that holds many books that have been here for a long time. The air carries what the paper is giving up. Every hour the room is closed, the concentration increases slightly. Every hour the ventilation runs, it disperses. The smell that greets the first reader in the morning is what the books released in the dark. The paper in a closed book changes at the same rate as the paper in an open one. Closing the cover does not stop this. The pages pressed together in the dark are the same pages they were this afternoon when a reader held the book open under the reading room light. The night does not interrupt the change in the fiber. What the night interrupts is the reading. The paper's own work continues regardless, at its own pace, in its own direction, without requiring the book to be open. The book that is read every day and the book that has not been touched in a decade are on the same path. The fiber in both shortens at the rate that the temperature and the acidity of each allow. The hands that have turned many pages left oils on the margins, left the slight compression of thumbed corners, left the record of use on the surfaces the use touched. But inside the text block, in the body of the pages where the hands did not reach, the fiber in the frequently read book and the fiber in the untouched book are at stages determined by time and chemistry, not by reading. The reading did not protect the one. The neglect did not damage the other. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The spines of the older books are cracked. The crack appears where the stress concentrated, at the hinge, the line where the cover board meets the text block, where the board swings away from the spine each time the book is opened. The adhesive at that joint has been flexed many times. Each opening puts stress into the dried glue. Enough openings, and the glue gave way at its weakest point, the crack running the length of the spine, the cover now held to the text block by the cloth alone. The crack is the record of the openings, not the reading. The reading left nothing in the binding. The opening and closing left this. A book opened many times has a different spine from a book opened few times, even if both were bound on the same day with the same materials by the same hands. What the binding records is not what the reader did with the pages. It is the mechanical history of the cover. The intact bindings are also changing, more slowly. The same dried glue is present at every hinge in this room, and the same process moves through all of it. The material hardening further in dry air, softening fractionally in humid air, the cycling of each year working into the glue as a slow fatigue that accumulates without announcing itself. The binding that is intact tonight is earlier on the same path the cracked binding has traveled further. Both arrived at their current state through the same process. One has simply had more time, or more openings, or both. The bindings in this room are at various stages, intact, beginning to stiffen at the hinge, cracked along the spine, repaired, a strip of cloth or tape applied at the failure point, the original path interrupted and redirected. Each state is a position on the same path. All of them here tonight, in the same dark, the glue in each responding to the same air at the same temperature and humidity, each at the stage the years and the use have brought it to. Consider what the repaired spine holds. The original cloth is still there beneath the repair tape, at the point where the glue failed. The failure is still there, the crack in the dried glue, the separation between the cover board and the text block, the line where the joint gave way. The repair did not remove the failure. It covered it, redirected it, gave the book a surface over the place where the original surface broke. The tape and the cloth beneath it are both present in the spine. The original material and the repair material, the failure and the response to the failure, held together in the thickness of the binding. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The color in the spines is leaving. Not tonight, not at any pace a night produces. But across the years these books have stood here. The dyes in the cloth and leather have been giving up their color to the light that reached them. The energy in light breaks the bonds that hold dye molecules in their colored configurations. When those bonds break, the molecule changes shape, and the changed shape absorbs and reflects light differently. Less color returned, or color shifted, the spine moving toward pale, toward neutral, toward the undyed cloth beneath. The outer books have faded more than the books behind them. pull a volume from the front of a shelf and hold it beside the volume that stood in its shadow. The inner book is darker, closer to what it was when it was made. The outer book has given some of that color to the years of light that fell on it directly. The difference between them is the record of position. Which one faced the windows, which one did not. They may have been shelved the same day. They are not the same color now. The fading is not uniform even across a single spine. The top of each spine received more light than the bottom. Closer to the overhead fixtures, angled differently to the windows. The center faded faster than the edges, which spent years in the slight shadow of adjacent volumes pressed against them. The gradient across the surface of one spine is the map of the light that spine received across its years in this position. The accumulation of every day of being shelved here, at this angle, between these neighbors. Tonight, the dies are stable. The overhead lights are off. The emergency strips illuminate the floor, not the shelves. The books face the aisle in whatever color the years have left them. The process that light drives suspended for these hours. For the color in the cloth and leather, the dark is the condition under which nothing is lost. The interval in which the spines hold what they still have, unchanged, until the light returns. The books that have spent years in this particular position have lost color in this particular pattern. Move any of them to a different position, and the fading that continues will be different. A different angle to the windows, different neighbors creating different shadows, a different portion of the spine exposed to the overhead light. The fade pattern that each book currently carries is the record of where it has been. It cannot be transferred to another position without the pattern becoming a record of two positions, the old fade and the new, the history of the first location preserved in the color that did not return. The books lose color in the light. They hold it in the dark. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Inside the closed books, the pages are in contact. Each page rests against the one beneath it, the surfaces touching along their full extent. At those surfaces, what one page carries can move into the next. Slowly, at the rate that dry contact between cellulose sheets allows, too slowly to matter across a year, measurable across decades. The acidity in a more degraded sheet moves gradually into the less degraded sheet it presses against. The more acidic page gives something to its neighbor. The neighbor receives it. Both change. The exchange moves outward from the more damaged pages toward the less damaged ones, the condition of the whole text block becoming, over sufficient time, more uniform than it was when the book was made, not restored, not worsened, redistributed, the damage more evenly held, the boundaries between pages less distinct, the book internally more continuous than it was when it was bound. The paper also breathes with the room. The pages swell with humidity and contract without it. The dimensional change across each sheet small enough that the book feels the same in the hand from season to season, but present in the slight waviness at the edges of older pages, in the way a very old book no longer lies perfectly flat when opened. The pages have absorbed the seasons this building has passed through. Each dry winter drew moisture from the fiber. Each humid summer returned it. The paper that is here tonight is the paper those cycles produced from the paper that was here when the book was first shelved. The book the reader opens tomorrow is not the book that was closed this afternoon. Not in any way the reader will notice. The words will be the same words. The pages will turn the same way. But the paper will be the paper that another night of exchange produced. One more night of contact between surfaces. One more cycle of the air's humidity moving through the fiber. The acidity redistributed by one more day's proximity. The text does not change. The material that carries the text does not stop. The night passes through the books the way it passes through everything in this room, through the oak of the shelves, through the dried glue at every hinge, through the dyes in the cloth that hold their color in the dark. The books are in the night. The night is in the books. Neither is interrupted by the other. The book is closed. The book is not finished. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. When night falls, the archive remains. When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, the air is still. Only what must continue, continues. The floor is still warm, not from the air. The air in this room has been cooling since the fires were banked, and the air is nearly at the temperature of the stone walls now, nearly at the temperature of the night outside them. The warmth underfoot comes from below. It comes from what the floor received during the day and has not yet released. The stone holds what the air has already given up. A foot placed flat on the mosaic feels this. The tesserae are small, each one a cut piece of stone or fired clay or glass, set into mortar, their upper faces flush with each other and with the surface. The surface is continuous. Beneath it, the mortar. Beneath the mortar, the structural floor. Beneath the structural floor, a space. The warmth that the foot receives has traveled upward through all of these layers to arrive at the surface. It left the space below some hours ago. It is still arriving. The mosaic holds the day's colors in the low light. Ochre, terracotta, the blue-gray of certain limestones, the dark red of tile fired at high temperature. These are the colors of the materials themselves, not applied to the surface but present in the composition of each tessera, in the minerals that give limestone its gray, in the iron oxides that give terracotta its warmth. The colors are what the materials are. They do not change with the light. They are the same at this hour as they were at noon, though the eye receives them differently now, the low light flattening the contrast, the shadows between the tesserae less distinct. The grout lines hold the shadow now. During the day, with the light at an angle, the slight relief between adjacent tesserae caught the light on one side and held shadow on the other. The surface reading as textured, the individual pieces distinguishable. In the near dark, the surface reads as flat. The grout lines present but not insistent, the individual tesserae losing their edges into the whole. The mosaic is the same surface it was at noon. The eye that reads it is working with less. The warmth in the floor is distributed unevenly. At the center of the room, where the floor is thickest, the stone holds more heat. The mass is greater, the surface area relative to the volume smaller, the ratio working in favor of retention. Near the walls, where the floor meets the vertical stone, the heat moves laterally into the wall as well as upward, and the floor at the edges is cooler than the floor at the center. A hand moved slowly across the surface would find this. A gradient, warmest at the middle, cooling toward the perimeter, the distribution a map of the floor's geometry and the heat that passed through it. The heat does not know the shape of the room. It moves through the material at the rate the material's density and conductivity allow, in every direction simultaneously, toward the cooler surfaces that surround it. The floor happens to be the path of least resistance between the space below and the air above. The heat takes that path. The warmth that the foot receives is heat in transit, already in motion before the foot arrived, continuing its movement through the floor toward the air, the foot intercepting a portion of what was already passing. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Below the floor, there is air. Not much, a shallow space, its height determined by the columns of tile that hold the floor above it. The columns are small, evenly spaced. Their spacing close enough that the floor they support does not flex under ordinary weight. The space between them was built to carry something other than weight. It was built to carry heat. The heat entered from one end of the space and moved through it. Hot air is less dense than the air around it. It rises when it can. In a confined horizontal space, it does not rise. It moves toward the far end, displaced by the hotter air that follows, the space acting as a channel that the heat passed through the way water passes through a channel, filling it, moving through it, exiting where it could, the temperature of the air in the channel at any point a record of how far from the source that point stood. The fires that heated this space were banked before midnight. The fuel was reduced, the temperature allowed to drop, the work of the day's heating complete. Since then, the air in the space below the floor has been cooling. The heat that was in the air has moved into the tile columns, into the structural floor, into the mortar, into the mosaic, upward through the layers, each layer receiving from the one below and giving to the one above. The movement slow, the rate determined by the density of each material and the temperature difference between them. The air below cools faster than the stone above. Air holds heat loosely. A given volume of air holds far less heat than the same volume of stone. When the fire stopped, the air in the hypocaust began to cool quickly. It had little to hold with. The tile columns, denser, with more mass per unit of surface area, cooled more slowly. They received heat from the air as long as the air was hotter, and when the air cooled past them, the exchange reversed. The columns gave heat back to the air, and the air carried it upward through the gaps in the floor structure, and the floor above received it. The columns are still warmer than the air around them. Not by much. The hours since midnight have narrowed the difference. But the stone has not reached the temperature of the air. It is closer than it was at midnight, closer than it was an hour ago. The gap between the column's temperature and the air's temperature is smaller each time it is measured, and each reduction makes the next reduction smaller, the approach continuing without the arrival ever quite coming, until the morning fires are lit and the direction reverses and the stone begins again to receive. The tile does not hold what the air held. The air below the floor lost its heat quickly. Air holds loosely, gives up readily, the temperature dropping fast once the source was removed. The tile gave back more slowly. The columns received heat from the air through the day and released it back through the night, the exchange running in both directions across the hours, the direction determined at each moment by which surface was warmer. The floor above received what the columns released. The air in the room received what the floor released. The room is cooler now than it was at midnight. The stone is warmer than the room. The structure does not know it is cooling. It is simply at whatever temperature the exchange between its surfaces and the surrounding air has left it at this hour. The tile is tile. The mortar is mortar. The air is air. What the night has done to the temperature of each is the condition they are in now, not diminished, not waiting, simply at the point that hours of exchange between warm stone and cool air produces when the fire no longer adds to what is being given away. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Where the warm stone meets the cooler air, water appears. Not everywhere. Only where the surface temperature has dropped below the point at which the moisture the air carries can remain vapor. At that point, the vapor gives up its energy to the stone and becomes liquid, a thin film forming on the surface, the droplets too small individually to see, but present as a change in how the stone reflects the available light. The dry surface matte, the condensed surface with a slight sheen, the difference visible if the light angle is right. The stone is being wetted by the air's own moisture. The air brought the water in. The water was invisible in the air, present as vapor, carried at the concentration the air's temperature permitted. When the stone cooled enough to pull the vapor out of the air at the surface, the water condensed. The air at the surface became slightly drier. The stone at the surface became slightly wetter. The exchange happened at the boundary between them, where the two materials met, where the temperature of one fell below what the other could hold. The condensation is not uniform. On the surfaces that have cooled furthest, the upper parts of the walls, where the stone is thinner and has released its heat more completely, the film is thicker. On the floor, still warm from the hypocaust, condensation has not formed. The floor surface is above the threshold. The moisture in the air above it passes over without giving itself up. The floor is dry. The walls above the midpoint are not. The line between dry and wet moves. As the floor cools through the night, the threshold descends. The dry zone contracts upward from below as the floor surface temperature drops, the condensation forming at lower and lower levels, the line between the wet wall and the dry floor rising as the floor joins the wall in giving up what it held. By the time the first light enters, the floor may be cool enough that condensation forms there too. The warmth that was still in it at midnight finally dispersed into the air that surrounds it. The water on the stone is heat made visible, not the heat itself. The heat has left. The water is the record of the departure, the moisture that the warm stone held at bay as long as the surface stayed above the threshold, and that the stone could no longer hold at bay once the temperature dropped. Where the stone was warm, the surface is dry. Where the stone has released its warmth, the surface is wet. The wetness is the map of what has already gone. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The stone makes sounds as it cools, not loud, not sounds that would register above ordinary noise, but in the silence of this hour, in the absence of water and voices and the movement of people through the space, the sounds are present. A small tick from somewhere in the wall, a faint creak from the joint between a column and the floor it supports. The sounds occur without pattern, without rhythm, at intervals that correspond to nothing except the moment when the stress in a particular piece of stone reaches the point where it releases. The stress is thermal. Stone expands when it is heated and contracts when it cools. The expansion and contraction are not uniform across a large structure. The outer surfaces cool faster than the interior, the thinner sections faster than the thicker, the stone near the air faster than the stone near the hypocaust. The pieces of stone that are cooling at different rates are bonded to each other. The mortar between them, the weight of the structure above pressing them together, the joinery that has held this building for the time it has stood. When adjacent pieces of stone contract at different rates, the difference becomes stress. The faster cooling piece tries to pull away from the slower cooling piece. The bond between them resists. The stress builds in the material at the joint, in the mortar, in the stone at the contact surface, until the bond yields slightly, the pieces shifting by a fraction too small to measure. The energy of the stress released as a brief sound and then gone. The sound is the building settling into the night's temperature. Each tick is a small resolution, the structure finding incrementally the configuration that the current temperature requires. The configuration at midnight is not the configuration at noon. The building occupies different geometries at different temperatures. The change is too small to see, but present as the accumulated shifts that the sounds mark. The sounds are not damage. The sounds are adjustment. The next sound comes from a different part of the wall. Then silence for a while. Then another from somewhere near the floor. The sounds are not regular. They are the building's own record of where it is cooling and how fast, and where the stress is releasing first. A sound map of the thermal state of the structure at this hour, inaudible in the day, present now because nothing else is. Between the sounds, the silence is complete, not the silence of a space that has never had sound in it. This room has held many sounds, and the stone has received them all and released them all without holding any. Sound does not accumulate in stone the way heat does. The conversations that took place in this room, the water, the movement of many people through the space, All of it passed through the air and arrived at the stone surfaces and scattered, absorbed at the rate the stone's density permitted, gone. What the stone held was the temperature of the air and water that moved through it. What passed through the air left no trace. The silence now is the silence of a room between its sounds. One interval of quiet among the many intervals this room has held. No different to the stone from the quiet between one voice and the next, from the pause between the morning and the afternoon, from any of the gaps between events that the stone has not distinguished from each other, because the stone makes no distinction. The room is quiet. It has been quiet before. It will be less quiet when the first people arrive. The stone will receive those sounds as it received these. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The first light enters from the east-facing opening. It is not yet sunrise. The sky outside is lightening, the darkness giving way to a grey that has no source yet. That is simply the sky's own response to what is approaching. The light that enters the room at this stage is indirect, scattered by the atmosphere before it arrives, arriving without the direction that direct sunlight carries, falling onto surfaces without producing shadows. The floor receives it. The mosaic surface, still warm in the center, cooler at the edges, the warmth that the hypocaust put into it hours ago still present in the thicker sections, still making its way upward and outward toward the air, receives the first light at the same time as it continues to give up the last of the previous day's heat. The two movements are simultaneous. The heat moving out through the surface, the light arriving at the surface. The light does not know what is in the stone. It arrives at the surface and is received there. Some portion absorbed, some portion scattered back into the room. The ratio determined by the color and texture of each tessera, by the presence or absence of the condensation film, by the angle of the surface relative to the incoming light. The ochre tesserae absorb differently from the grey limestone. The wet wall absorbs differently from the dry floor. The light that enters the room at this hour distributes itself across all of these surfaces according to their current condition, which is the condition the night has left them in. The floor is warm under the first light, warm from yesterday. The heat that entered through the hypocaust 2 days ago, or 3, the stone holding deep in its mass what the surface has long since released, is still in the material, still moving upward, still arriving at the surface in amounts too small to feel without stillness and attention. The light arrives from outside, the warmth arrives from below. Both reach the same surface. The stone holds both, not equally. Light does not accumulate in stone the way heat does. The light that falls on the floor now will not still be falling tonight. But the heat that the floor holds now is heat from a fire that no longer burns, from a day that has already passed, carried forward in the mass of the material at the rate that stone carries things, slowly, without loss, for longer than the air around it remembers what the temperature was. The first birds are audible outside. The sounds the stone makes are less frequent now. The temperature differential between sections is smaller, the rate of contraction slower, the building closer to the equilibrium the cool morning air produces. The ticking settles. The stone finds its new geometry in the light. The floor is warm. The light is on it. Both are here in the same surface at the same moment, and the surface does not distinguish between them, holds what it holds, receives what arrives, gives up what it can no longer keep. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. When night falls, the archive remains. When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, the air is still. Only what must continue, continues. The bottles are on the shelves where they were left, some full, some partially used, some empty and waiting to be returned to the supplier. Their positions were not arranged for the night. They are where the last person to handle them set them down, which is approximately where they belong, close enough that the room reads as ordered without any individual bottle being precisely in its designated place. The labels face outward on most of them. On a few, the label has rotated slightly, the text angled away from the aisle, readable only if a hand turns the bottle back. No hand turns it back tonight. The room is lit by a single overhead fixture, not the full bank of lights that the working hours require, but the overnight lamp, lower wattage, positioned toward the center of the ceiling. The light falls from there in all directions. Most of it reaches the floor, the counter surfaces, the edges of the shelves. Some of it reaches the bottles. Where the light enters a glass bottle, it slows. Not by much. Glass is not opaque. The light passes through. The delay is a fraction of what it would take to measure with ordinary instruments. But the slowing is real, and the slowing changes the direction of the light. At the curved surface of a bottle, the light arriving from the lamp at one angle exits into the glass at a different angle, bent toward the perpendicular of the surface, bent by an amount determined by the ratio of how fast light moves in air to how fast it moves in this particular glass. The ratio is fixed. It is a property of the material, present in every bottle on these shelves, the same in the full bottles and the empty ones, the same tonight as it was when the bottles were made. The light bends. The bend is the same every time. What changes is the geometry of the surface. The light enters, the curve of each bottle, the thickness of the glass at each point, the shape that the manufacturer pressed the molten glass into before it cooled and fixed its form. A cylindrical bottle bends the light differently from a square one. A bottle with a narrow neck bends it differently at the shoulder than at the base. The light passing through any bottle on these shelves is taking the path that the shape of that bottle determines. The path fixed into the glass when the form was decided, present in every photon that passes through at this angle, at this hour, in this room. The glass in the bottles is not uniform in its thickness. At the base, where the molten glass pooled before the form was set, the walls are thicker. At the shoulder, where the glass was pulled upward and outward, the walls are thinner. The difference in thickness produces a difference in how far the light travels through the material before it exits. A thicker wall means more glass, more slowing, a greater total deflection by the time the light emerges on the far side. The light that exits through the base of a bottle has been deflected more than the light that exits through the shoulder. The pattern of light the bottle casts on the shelf behind it is the map of its own wall thickness, projected outward by the lamp above. The bottles are full of information about themselves, not in any way that announces itself, in the way that materials carry the record of how they were made, in the variation of thickness that the blowing and pressing produced, in the slight asymmetries where the glass moved unevenly as it cooled, in the refractive pattern each bottle casts when light passes through it. The information is in the glass. The light reads it out. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. On the counter below the shelves, a graduated cylinder stands alone. It is taller than the bottles around it, narrower, its walls thinner. The glass is clear, no tint, no label obscuring the surface, nothing between the eye and the interior. Along one side, a column of markings runs from near the base to near the top, lines of varying length at regular intervals, numbers beside the longer ones. The markings are not printed on the glass. They are in the glass, pressed into the surface during manufacture. The mold that shaped the cylinder carrying the negative of each marking, each line a slight depression in the outer wall, each number a shallower depression beside it. The markings exist as changes in the glass surface. Each line is a place where the outer wall is slightly thinner than the wall on either side, where the surface curves inward by a fraction before curving back. The depth of each depression is the same. The mold that produced them was made to a specification, and the specification was held within a tolerance, and the tolerance was small enough that the markings produced by this mold and the markings produced by a mold made to the same specification in a different facility would fall at positions indistinguishable to any instrument this room contains. The lowest marking is at a specific height above the interior base of the cylinder, not approximately, exactly, within the tolerance the specification permitted. The marking at 10 milliliters is at the height where 10 milliliters of liquid in this cylinder with this interior diameter reaches. The relationship between the marking and the volume it indicates was established when the cylinder was calibrated, and the calibration holds as long as the glass holds its shape, which glass at room temperature and ordinary pressures does indefinitely. The cylinder has not been used today. The marking at 10 milliliters is at the same height it was yesterday and the day before, and the day the cylinder arrived in this room. The markings are where they are whether or not anyone is reading them. The cylinder has not moved since it was set down. The marking at 10 milliliters is at the height it was at when the cylinder was calibrated, which is the height it will be at tomorrow, which is the height it will be at in 10 years if the glass remains intact. The calibration does not require use to persist. The marks do not require a reader. The relationship between the line and the volume it indicates exists in the geometry of the cylinder, held there by the stability of the glass, present in the empty room as in the working one. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. In the drawers below the counter, the tablets are in their trays. Each tablet is a compressed form, powder that was measured, mixed, and then pressed between two dies under several tons of force. The powder particles forced into contact with each other, the contact close enough that the particles bond, the mass becoming a solid that holds its shape when the dies release. The shape the dies pressed is the shape the tablet has now, a specific diameter, a specific thickness, a specific curvature to the faces, the same across every tablet produced in the same run on the same machine. The compression that made the tablet is over. The force that produced it was applied and released in a fraction of a second, and the tablet that remained was the result. Not the force itself, but the state the force produced. The particles bonded at their contact points, the shape held by the bonds rather than by the continuing application of pressure. The tablet in this drawer was compressed months ago in a facility elsewhere, by a machine that has since compressed many other tablets. The compression is gone. The form it produced is here. The tablet holds its shape against the forces that would change it. Humidity enters the tray slowly through the seal that is not perfect. The moisture touches the tablet's surface, finds the bonds between the outermost particles, works into the small spaces between them. This happens slowly, at the rate that moisture moves through a compressed solid, and the tablet that has been in this tray for a month has received more of this than the tablet that arrived last week. The outer layers of the older tablet have softened fractionally, not visibly, not in any way that the tablet's function requires concern, but present as the slight difference in resistance that a fingernail would find pressing into the surface of a tablet stored for a long time versus one that is fresh. The form holds. The surface is not what it was. Both are the tablet, the shape the compression fixed, and the surface that the months since have worked on. The interior still at the density the dies produced, and the exterior at the density that time and moisture have brought it to. The tablet in this drawer has been here long enough that it is not only what the machine made it, it is also what the drawer has made of it, slowly, in the time since. Each tablet in the tray is at a slightly different stage of this. The tablets toward the back of the tray have been here longer than the tablets toward the front. The front replenished most recently, the back the oldest stock. The arrangement a consequence of how the tray is filled and emptied over time. The tablets at the front and the tablets at the back are the same tablets, made in the same run on the same machine. What differs is the time each has spent in the drawer since arriving. That time is in the surface of each tablet, invisibly, as the current state of the outermost particles and the bonds between them. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The drawers themselves carry a different record. Each drawer is wood, a dense, close-grained species chosen for dimensional stability, for resistance to the humidity cycling that a room like this produces over years of use. The front face of each drawer is smooth, finished to a surface that cleans easily, that does not absorb the residue that pharmaceutical work deposits on surfaces. The sides and the base are less finished. These surfaces contact the frame of the cabinet, not the hands of the person using it. Where the hand contacts the drawer, the wood is different. The pull is centered on the front face, slightly below the midpoint of the height. At that point, the finish has been worn by years of the same grip. Not removed, not damaged, but worked into a state that is distinguishable from the finish on either side. The oil from many hands has entered the wood at that point, darkening it fractionally, changing the way it reflects the overhead light. The surface that was finished to the same specification as the surface around it is no longer the same surface. It is what that specification produced after years of the same contact in the same place. The wear is not uniform across all the drawers. The drawers at counter height show more wear than the drawers below the counter. The ones that require bending to reach, that are used less frequently because their contents are less often needed. The most used drawer, the one whose contents are reached for many times each day, has a pull surface more worn than the pull surface of the drawer beside it, which holds something retrieved less often. The wear distribution across the cabinet face is the record of what is needed often and what is needed rarely, pressed into the wood by the accumulated friction of the same actions performed in the same place. Over the years this cabinet has stood here. The wood did not intend to record this. It received the contact and changed at the rate the contact and the material allowed. The record is in the surface because the surface was present for the contact. Nothing more. A different cabinet in a different dispensary, holding the same contents in the same arrangement, would carry a different wear pattern if the people who used it reached differently, if the most needed drawer was on a different side, if the hand that most often pulled was a different hand. The wear is specific to this cabinet, this room, this sequence of uses. It is not transferable. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The light from the overnight lamp reaches the graduated cylinder on the counter. It enters the glass at the curved surface, bends, passes through the interior, which is air at this hour, no liquid, and exits through the opposite wall, bending again, arriving at the counter surface below the cylinder as a widened, redistributed version of the light that entered. The cylinder has acted on the light the way its shape requires, bending it at entry, bending it again at exit, the two bends determined by the curvature of the walls at each point. Where the light exits through the marked side of the cylinder, it passes through the depressions. At each marking, each line pressed into the glass surface, the wall is slightly thinner, the curvature slightly different, the bend slightly changed. The light that exits through a marked line exits at a marginally different angle from the light that exits through the unmarked glass on either side. The difference is small. Its effect on the counter below is a faint patterning, the markings casting a shadow not of darkness, but of slightly different light, the intervals between them reproduced on the counter surface at a scale the cylinder's distance from the counter determines. The intervals on the counter are the intervals of the markings projected. The spacing between the shadow of the 10 milliliter line and the shadow of the 20 milliliter line corresponds to the spacing between those markings on the glass, modified by the geometry of the projection. The lines are there on the counter, not as marks, not as anything that would survive the lamp being switched off, but as the current distribution of the light that the cylinder is producing from the lamp above. They are present now. They will be gone when the light changes. No one is reading them. The counter receives them the way it receives everything that falls on it, without registering, without holding, the light present at the surface and not in the surface. The markings reproduced in light on a material that doesn't record light. The graduated cylinder stands between the lamp and the counter, doing what its shape does to the light that passes through it, producing on the counter the pattern that its geometry and the lamp's position determine. The bottles on the shelves are doing the same, each one bending the light that enters it according to the shape the manufacturer fixed in the glass, sending it outward at angles the material determines, the redistributed light falling on the shelves, the walls, the other bottles, the surfaces of this room that receive what the room's one lamp and the room's many glass objects together produce. The light in this room is not the light from the lamp. It is the light from the lamp after the glass has worked on it, refracted, redistributed, multiplied into directions that a single bare bulb would not have sent it. The glass does this without regard for the hour. The bottles on the shelves, the cylinder on the counter, the small vials in the cabinet above, all of them bending the light that reaches them at the angles their shapes require, all of them returning light to the room at angles the lamp alone would not have produced. The room is lit by the lamp and by the glass, by the fixed property of the material and the fixed geometry of the forms, operating together in the empty hours as in the working ones. The light taking the paths the glass provides, the paths present in the glass since the glass was made. The bottles stand where they were left. The light moves through them. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. When night falls, the archive remains. When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, The air is still. Only what must continue, continues. The salt is not what it appears to be. In a container, on a shelf, in a room, it appears as white granules, dry, separate, each one a small solid that holds its shape against the touch and the air and the weight of the granules above it. It appears to be a substance at rest. What it is the record of water that is no longer here. Every grain was made by water leaving, not shaped by water, not carved by water, made by the departure of water, the space that the water occupied becoming the space that the grain now fills, the form of the water's absence fixed by the physics of what the water left behind. The grain is here, the water is not. The grain is the shape that the water's leaving made. Before it was a grain, it was part of something larger. Before it was anything solid, it was not solid at all. It was dissolved, dispersed, present in water as the components it becomes when water pulls it apart. The sodium and the chloride separated in the water, each surrounded by water molecules, each held in suspension by the attraction between the water molecules and the charged particles themselves. In this state there is no crystal, no grain, no form. There is only the even distribution of two kinds of particle through a medium that holds them apart and keeps them moving. The salt in the sea is in this state, not waiting to become a crystal, not tending toward a solid form, simply present as ions in water, stable in that condition for as long as the water remains and the concentration stays below the point at which the ions can no longer remain apart. The ocean has held this salt for a long time. The salt has not become a crystal in the ocean because the ocean has not evaporated. The crystal is not the salt's natural state. It is what the salt becomes when the water that holds it apart is no longer there. The grain on the shelf was in the ocean once, not this grain, not as this grain, as ions dispersed, surrounded by water, stable in solution. The path from that state to this one required water to leave. The water left. The ions approached. The first bond formed. The lattice grew. The crystal was harvested and processed and eventually arrived here, on this shelf, in this room, a solid form holding the arrangement that the water's departure made possible and then fixed in place. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Water leaves one molecule at a time. At the surface of any body of water, some water molecules are moving fast enough to escape the attraction of the molecules around them, to detach from the surface and enter the air above as vapor. This happens continuously at every water surface, at every temperature above absolute zero. At higher temperatures, more molecules have enough energy to escape. At lower temperatures, fewer, but some always do. The departure is not an event, it is a rate. Each molecule that leaves takes nothing with it. The sodium and the chloride that were suspended in the water do not follow. They have no mechanism for joining the vapor. They are ions, charged particles, and the process that allows water molecules to escape into the air does not apply to them. The water leaves, the ions remain. The water that remains after each departure is the same water minus what left. And in that remaining water, the same ions are now in a slightly smaller volume. The concentration rises. As the volume of water decreases and the quantity of dissolved ions stays constant, the ions are closer together than they were. The solution becomes more concentrated, not by addition of anything but by subtraction of the water that had been holding the ions apart. The space that the water occupied, the water is no longer occupying. The ions are in whatever space remains. At a certain concentration, the ions can no longer remain apart. The repulsion between like charges and the attraction between opposite charges, these forces have been present throughout, but when the water was abundant, the water molecules between the ions were sufficient to mediate them, to keep the sodium away from the sodium and the chloride away from the chloride. As the water thins, the mediation weakens. The unlike charges approach. At the point where the approach is close enough, the attraction is stronger than the thermal motion that would keep them separate. The first bond forms. Two ions held together. Then a third joins. The geometry of the charges pulling it to the position where the forces balance. Then a fourth, a fifth, the structure growing by one ion at a time, each new arrival taking the position that the field of the existing structure requires. Not any position, the position, the one where the charges are most satisfied, where the energy of the arrangement is lowest, where the structure is most stable against the thermal motion that would otherwise displace it. The structure assembles without a plan. No ion moves toward the growing crystal because it is a crystal. It moves because it is a charged particle in a solution, subject to the forces that charge particles. In solutions are subject to the attraction of opposite charges, the thermal motion of the medium, the statistical likelihood of being in one place rather than another at any given moment. The ion that joins the lattice joins it because the lattice happened to offer the position where the forces on that ion are satisfied. The lattice grows because satisfied positions keep accumulating at its edges. What looks like assembly is the statistical consequence of forces, repeated until a structure exists. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The structure that forms is cubic, not because someone decided this, because the geometry of two ions of opposite charge, in equal numbers, arranging themselves to minimize the distance between unlike charges and maximize the distance between like charges, produces a cubic arrangement. Sodium here, chloride there, sodium here, chloride there. Alternating in 3 dimensions, the spacing between them determined by the size of the ions and the strength of the bonds. The result, a lattice that extends outward in all 3 directions at equal intervals. The lattice is not assembled, it grows. Each ion that joins takes the position the existing lattice offers, the site where the forces pull it, where it fits, where the structure is completed by its presence. The crystal does not plan its next layer. The next layer arrives because the conditions at the surface make one position, and only one position, stable for each approaching ion. The geometry is the consequence of the forces. The forces do not know they are building a cube. A salt crystal breaks along flat planes, not randomly, along the planes that correspond to the layers of the lattice. When force is applied and the crystal fractures, it fractures where the lattice is weakest, which is between the layers, which is at the planes where the pattern repeats. The fracture face is flat because the lattice is flat at that depth. The angle of the fracture face is the angle of the lattice plane because there is no other angle the fracture could follow without crossing bonds that are stronger. The shape of the broken crystal is the shape of the interior order expressed at the surface. What the fracture reveals is not damage. It is the internal geometry of the material made visible by the separation. Before the fracture, the cubic arrangement was present throughout the crystal, in every layer, inaccessible to the eye. After the fracture, the surface is a cross-section of that arrangement, flat, precise, angled at the exact angle the lattice requires. The crystal did not acquire this property at the moment of fracture. It had it since the first ions arranged themselves. The fracture only showed it. Hold a crystal of salt between the eye and a light source. The faces catch the light and return it, not scattered, not diffuse, returned in directions determined by the angles of the faces, which are the angles of the lattice planes. The light that comes back from a salt crystal comes back in the directions the crystal's geometry sends it. The geometry was set when the first ions arranged themselves in the water. The light follows the geometry now, in this room, at this hour. The path it takes through the reflections, a consequence of a structure that was assembled ion by ion, from a solution that no longer exists. The crystal that forms in a still solution is more regular than the crystal that forms in a disturbed one. In still water, each ion arrives at the growing surface slowly, with time to find its position before the next ion arrives. The lattice grows layer by layer, each layer complete before the next begins, the geometry preserved across the whole surface. In agitated water, ions arrive from multiple directions simultaneously, some taking positions before others have settled, the growth uneven, the edges irregular, the geometry present but imperfect, the ideal form interrupted by the conditions of its formation. The still solution produces the more cubic crystal. The record of the water's stillness is in the regularity of the form. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. On a rocky coast, the pools that form above the tide line are not replenished at every tide. They receive seawater when the tide is high enough to reach them, which is not every tide and not every season. Between those arrivals, the water in the pool evaporates. The sun heats the surface, the wind moves across it. The water molecules depart at the rate the temperature and the air movement allow. The pool shrinks. The concentration of ions in the remaining water rises. If the tide does not return before the concentration passes the threshold, crystals begin to form at the edges and the base of the pool. The surfaces where the water is shallowest, where the concentration is highest, where the first bonds form. The tide returns, the crystals dissolve. The water floods the pool, dilutes the brine, pulls the ions back apart, and the crystals that had formed release their ions back into solution. The structure disassembles by the same process that assembled it, running in reverse. Water molecules entering between the ions, the bonds breaking as the water mediates the charges again, the ions dispersing into the water that came with the tide. Over many tides, the pool changes. The rock at the pool's base is not the same rock it was when the pool was young. The crystals that form and dissolve at the surface of the rock enter the small cracks and pores in the stone, crystallizing inside them, expanding as they crystallize, applying force to the walls of the crack from within. The force is small at any single cycle. Over many cycles, it widens the crack. The rock gives way to the crystal that is forming and dissolving inside it, the pool deepening and widening at the rate that the crystallization pressure allows across the years. The pool is carved by the crystal that disappears. Each time the crystal forms, it does work on the rock. Each time it dissolves, the work remains. The crack slightly wider, the surface slightly changed, the rock shaped by the presence and absence of a structure that is not there now, and will be there again when the conditions return. The pool is the record of all the crystallizations. The pool does not hold a single crystal. It holds the consequence of every crystal that ever formed and dissolved inside it. Deeper in the sediment below old sea floors, salt beds lie in horizontal layers. These formed over geological time. Shallow seas that evaporated completely, the salts precipitating out as the water level fell, layer by layer, each layer corresponding to one episode of evaporation. The sequence of layers, the sequence of those episodes. The salt in those beds has been solid for millions of years. The ions arrange themselves in those lattices during periods when the continents were in different positions, when the life forms on the surface were different, when the climate was different. The lattice does not carry any of that. It carries the arrangement of ions, sodium here, chloride there, which is the same arrangement as the lattice in the crystal that formed yesterday in the pool above the tide line, and the same arrangement as the lattice in the grain on the shelf in the room. All the same structure, different times. The structure does not know the difference. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. In the still air of this room, the crystals on the surface of the salt are growing. Not quickly. The air here is not saturated with water vapor. The concentration at the crystal surface is not at the threshold that rapid crystallization requires. But where a small amount of moisture in the air contacts the surface of a grain, where the humidity is slightly elevated at the microscale, where conditions are close enough to the threshold, ions are finding their positions in the lattice, one at a time, without hurry, without the awareness that this is growth rather than simply the consequence of a charge seeking its lowest energy state. The crystal does not know it is growing. It is simply a structure whose surface has sites available, positions in the lattice where the geometry requires another ion, where the forces at the edge of the existing arrangement are unbalanced, where the arrival of the right ion would complete the pattern the lattice has been extending since the first bond formed. The surface waits in the sense that a key waits for a lock, not with anticipation, but with the shape that arrival would satisfy. The ions in the air above the crystal are moving. They are not ions here. They are dissolved in the thin film of moisture that forms on surfaces when the humidity is high enough. moving in the water the way they moved in the sea, carried by the random motion of the solution, approaching the crystal surface from all directions, most of them not at a position the lattice can use, most of them drifting past the edge without finding the site that would hold them. Some find it. The arrival is not an event that can be timed. It is a rate, a certain number of ions per unit of surface area per unit of time, finding their positions, completing the pattern, the crystal growing at the pace that the solution concentration and the surface geometry allow. The growth is uneven, faster at the corners and edges of the crystal, where more lattice sites are exposed, where more arriving ions can find their positions simultaneously. The corners sharpen, the faces flatten, the cube becomes more cubic as it grows, the geometry asserting itself more clearly at larger scales than it could at smaller ones. The water that carried the first ions to their positions is gone. It evaporated in whatever place the crystal first formed, in a tide pool, in a salt flat, in an evaporating pan somewhere, at some point before the crystal was harvested and processed and arrived in this room. The water that mediated the bonds, that allowed the ions to approach and find their positions, that made the arrangement possible by carrying the ions within range of the forces that would hold them. That water is not here. The arrangement it made is here. The lattice that formed in that water, the geometry that the forces required and the water allowed, the structure that grew ion by ion, to the size the conditions sustained before the crystal was removed from the solution. This is here, on the shelf, in the container, in each grain that holds the form the water's leaving produced. The water left, the shape remained. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. When night falls, the archive remains.